Because I don't know what's your what's the word? What's your MO for this podcast? I mean, what's your
It's literally just interesting conversations
okay, okay,
about things that will add value. There's not
okay,
like we need to talk about business or we need to
okay,
talk about conspiracies or we need to
okay,
talk about art or we need to talk about papers. It's just, it's like I like to be able to have anybody on who has information that people would find valuable and it's yeah, I mean it's I see it kind of going in more of a direction that is like the Modern Wisdom podcast, but more like what we have to offer,
okay.
which is something very unique, which
I
is a very unique perspective.
I'm not familiar with them,
And
but
obviously, it's not just going to be us
right.
doing this. I'll be doing episodes with all sorts of different people, but I just kind of have like a stable of like 5 to 8 different people who I can have on when I don't have anybody else lined up.
Okay,
You know,
okay. Hey,
which means I can make an episode whenever I need to.
I'm
You
always
know,
down to chat. Whatever.
mm.
Yeah,
so
no, I've been having a lot
so
of very.
different people bring in different
Oh,
perspectives.
I tell you. Well, maybe if you don't mind. Did you read
Yeah,
any of the quote the kind of clip snippets from the book I've been reading that I sent in the
was it the language
the
stuff?
language stuff? Yeah,
No, I didn't get a
I've been
chance.
having just crazy with this
Yeah,
book lately,
yeah.
but you don't have to get
It
too
was
deep
like, I
into
mean,
it.
give me
But
the gist of it.
the gist that I'm getting kind of obsessed with now is formulas. So you had for context, you had talked to me about how you're learning Spanish, and you had made that
Yeah,
comment about okay, I'm learning vocabulary and grammar, and I just sort of put them together, right? And that's a really
yeah,
common thought that people, or a really common model that people have about language. Oh, it's just you have grammar, which is like the rules for how you put stuff together, and then you have the vocabulary, which
yeah,
is just the stuff, right? And on top of
yeah.
that, you have like suffixes and prefixes and whatever, but that's just like extra bits. But then the book I'm reading is playing, and also that idea that you expressed is like generative linguistics. It's everything that I studied. It's the whole school of thought around how the human language faculty works and blah blah blah. But
Mm-hmm.
what I think my first thought that I've known for a while is that it's completely useless for language learning, totally useless because you can learn grammatical patterns and memorize words all you want, but it's not going to help you put them together into sentences that native speakers would actually say. And I think that's sort of the key
Right.
insight that I've been following for a couple years now. But I found this recent book talking about formulas in language, and pay very close attention to language in general. When any kind of language, obviously in your native language especially, but things are not
Mm-hmm.
just randomly put together; they are formulaic. So we have the most common example is like rituals like hello, goodbye, um,
Yeah.
which by themselves don't really mean anything, but in a social context they mean something. But even most other language is not totally novel. It is made up of prefabricated bits. I don't know. We could go deeper into that, but that's kind of the
You
basic
mean
idea.
like premeditated chunks?
Basically, yeah. Like
Yeah.
I'm trying to think.
Hasta luego. Like
Osloica was one. Yeah, exactly.
por
Yeah,
aquí.
yeah, and that's actually
Yeah.
two words, right? Uh,
Mm.
until later. And you could imagine they could say it differently if they wanted to. I mean, it could be grammatical. In English, we don't say until later. We say see you later. Well, you're not really going to be seeing
Yeah.
me anywhere. I mean, you might see me, you might not, right? I mean, it's kind of it's kind of
Yeah.
meaningless, but it's just a set
Yeah.
phrase. It's
Idioms.
idioms exactly, but most people think of. I think that's what's interesting, and that's one idea I think that kind of triggered my journey down this road is idioms,
Yeah.
but not just idioms, but because people think of idioms as these kind of as like proverbs, right? Like an apple a day keeps the doctor away. It's just a phrase. It's a set
Figure of
phrase.
speech.
It's a figure exactly a figure of speech. But
Yeah.
idiomatic language goes deeper um, in the sense that it's a language usage that that's reflected by the way native speakers use the language. And it's actually one of the easiest ways to tell that someone is not a native speaker. Even if they can pronounce things properly, they don't put words together the way you would. And maybe what they said made sense, but it isn't how you put
Yeah.
it together. One example is collocations, which is like words that just go together in a set. Like I asked Veronica this, and she actually got this right. And my wife. What was it? Oh, um, you do something and there's a benefit, and the verb that you use, you blank the benefit. What verb goes there?
You reap the
You
benefit.
reap the benefits. Yeah. So it's a specific
The reaping is like
collocation.
a harvesting
A
term.
harvesting, yeah. So it kind of has a little bit of a
Yeah.
figure. I actually think it might be biblical.
Agricultural.
Agricultural, right? Because so as you reap, or sorry, as you sow,
You
so
reap
shall
what you
you
sow.
reap, right? Yeah. So it kind of
Yeah.
almost has a figure of speech contained in that collocation, but that's consistently used. We take a risk. Um, Something poses risk. That's a very
Yeah.
another. Anyway, everything's collocations, and also words don't mean
But
anything. They're only words don't have meanings. They have usages, and everything is contextual. And a lot of phrases and idiomatic usages, they don't really mean anything. They just have a social connotation, and that's what everyone uses to speak. And so most of the time, people don't even know what they're saying or what anybody else is saying. Anyway, so that's where I've kind of
but like, is a co-location? What's the difference between a co-location and an idiom?
an idiot. Well,
You know.
I mean, actually in Spanish, the word idioma means
Language.
just means language in general, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a funny word, and I don't know what the original meaning was in English. I just know that nowadays when people say idiom, they typically mean a figure of speech, which is a complete sentence,
Yeah.
usually with a meaning that is not obvious from the parts. So in linguistics they would call it opaque. The meaning is opaque. You just have to
Yeah.
know. I learned a Polish idiom today. Fear has big eyes
Yeah.
is a Polish idiom. If you know what it literally means, but the hidden meaning is sometimes things look worse than they actually are.
Right.
So that's like the proverbial meaning. But there are other ones that are even more opaque, like I got it. What's a really like kick the bucket is a very common English phrase.
Yeah.
Completely opaque. No idea but it means die. Right.
Yeah.
So a collocation
Well,
usually refers to just two words, but
I mean, that co-location would function to mask the emotional valence of a Stark
it
event.
could have a social
Death.
a social reason for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to get at the root of why we, as humans, create these co-locations or idioms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do they just kind of? Do you realize in your kind of linguistic research or study that they just kind of naturally form over time, or they're like, are there like commonalities of like why they form in certain cultures or
They form in all cultures.
across cultures?
Yeah, they seem to form in all
But
cultures.
like why?
But they are cultural, first of all. So good. That's a good point to make, like you just said. And I think that's kind of what this book is basically about. Is like why. First of all, there are formulas, which again, if you want to get deeper into like the conspiracy side of things, Chomsky is like known as the kingpin of
Well,
linguistics. But so much of what he says doesn't really pan out, and it doesn't really get addressed. And this book is like 20 years old, I think. But I never learned anything about anything like this in school when I was studying linguistics.
Right.
But one explanation
And
that she gives.
how far did you go in school?
What do you mean? Oh,
Linguistics.
I have a master's in linguistics, a master's degree
Okay.
by research.
Okay.
So that means I wrote
And you did
something
some-
too. Actually, my old
You did some doctorate level stuff too, right?
no, not really.
No.
But I mean, not really. Planning a little bit, but never got into it.
I see. Gotcha.
I actually did just meet up with my old supervisor though.
Yeah.
And she was asking me for some data. So anyway, maybe my name will go on something too. Who knows? I'll be co-author.
Uh-huh.
just because I gathered some data. Oh, well, the data that she had
Mr. Selkirk.
was quite interesting. Yeah, not quite doctor,
Yeah,
but you know,
but
Mister.
yeah, but you were saying about this book.
So about the book, what this woman
Yeah.
is arguing is, so she's talking about why did the formulas form, and she gives a few ideas. I'm only like halfway through the book, and one of the ideas is processing. So instead of having to come up with a new utterance every time you want to say something, humans actually end up in the same situations over and over and over. So it's a lot
Yeah.
easier to just use a prefabricated chunk that you've already used before, and it
Yeah.
may have a complex internal structure,
Use a little linguistic snippet or macro essentially.
basically a macro. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's processing on the speaking side. There's processing on the listening side,
Yeah.
and then there's also she ultimately starts to go at it from a cultural perspective, which is language is used as a way to get people to do things for you, especially when you first start using language because you're a kid and you can't do anything.
Right.
So you're constantly trying to change your social environment, basically your material and your social environment. And so, because one of the main formulas that people first pointed out when they were looking at this stuff is obviously politeness formulas, which kids are intentionally and very consciously sort of inducted into. Say please and thank you or whatever, right? But there are other formulas that are kind of
Yeah.
politeness formulas that are not just please and thank you, but excuse me. A weird one is like bless you. Everyone compulsively says bless you when you sneeze, right? It just means nothing, but we
Right.
always say it, right? Um, but yeah, so those are some of the reasons that she gives. But to me, the reason why it's blowing my mind, I guess, in the larger sense, is um, yeah, people, were when you're talking about sharing ideas like you do on the podcast and um,
Yeah.
the marketplace of ideas or whatever you want to call it, which has been kind of a term lately, right? What
Yeah.
form are those ideas?
Freedom of speech in the
Freedom of
marketplace of
speech.
ideas.
Yeah, right. All this.
Yeah.
What form are those ideas actually expressed in? And do you even
Yeah.
know what's coming out of your mouth? And I'm not saying that people are talking completely unconsciously. I guess I'm just saying
Yeah.
that like one of the first example that she like when she opens the book, she gives the example of Rice Krispies. And I don't remember if it was actually a study or something like that, but if you ask people, what are Rice Krispies made of? A lot of people say they don't know, right? Even though
Mm-hmm.
it's right in the name. It's made of rice, right? But it's
And
a
Krispies.
rice they're crisp rice, right? But it's a large
TM.
chunk that people have
Yeah.
just memorized and they haven't analyzed it anymore. And
Well, that's a brand.
it's a brand. It's a brand. But my point is,
And it became like a word because it was so
yes,
common.
yes, for sure, for sure. But the what
Yeah.
it's made of is right in the fucking, right in the string.
Yeah.
Anyway, what I'm getting at is these prefabricated chunks, the true bits and pieces of them, people are not really analyzing what's being said. They're just getting the sense of what's said. Even dumb things like indirect requests, like "Could you please open the door?" It's a command to open the door. It's not
Mm.
no one's analyzing, I wonder why he would ask me that. Could I open it? Well,
Can
my
you very
arms work,
politely get off
whatever.
your ass and open the fucking door for
Yeah,
me?
but
Like,
what I'm saying is it's in a way, there's no need to analyze it. I'm not saying that people should analyzing it.
yeah.
I'm just saying that the way language functions is not this like really it's also kind of an indictment of the whole Chomskyan thing where all speakers
Yeah.
of languages they break down all the utterances into their little pieces and they have the structure and the traces and the merge function and blah 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 blah
Yeah.
blah and the spec TP, and it's like people aren't doing that when they're processing language, and so all of us can think more consciously about what we're hearing, not just what we think we're hearing, but what's actually being said and what's not being said. And
Right.
is there a sort of a more of a social thrust to what's being said? Because that's a lot of what argumentation is. People think, oh, we're debating facts and stuff. You're not debating facts. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, we're just debating the origin of where human perception and computation takes place and what influences it.
Well, yeah, that's what we're talking about. I guess I'm talking about even like the culture
Yeah.
wars that you see going on, right? And that's why even stuff like the transgender business and whatever, we don't have to get into that, but you know,
Yeah.
I don't even really take part in it in a detached way. I'm almost just kind of like watching it like, what are people saying and how are they talking about it? And what does that mean for
Yeah.
their cultural
And
concepts? And
and do they even know how they're construing it?
how they're construing it? Do they even know how they think
Yeah.
that other people are construing it? And it's like
Right.
the whole discourse is just completely muddled. There's no way to get to the bottom of it. And then at the very top, you have a bunch of, I would say, capitalists who can take good advantage of that and make a lot of money on the culture war. That's why, like, you shared that Ben Shapiro
Yep.
tweet with me yesterday. Whatever. And
Yeah.
I just have a laugh. Like, they're just making a fucking scene, capitalizing on the complete
Yeah.
disarray of the discourse, which is partly based on how
Yeah.
people don't know what they're saying, because language is just a
Yeah.
lot of
This.
anyway.
Yeah. Quick thing is, A, what's the book called and who wrote it?
Oh yeah, the book is Formulaic Language and a Lexicon by Allison Wray, Wray. She's I
Okay.
can't remember what university she's at. Like I think in Wales. She's in Wales
Okay.
somewhere.
You'll have to
It's a very
send me a
academic.
link to that book.
It's a very yeah. I got it from the library actually. Veronica borrowed it for me from University of Edinburgh
Yeah.
Library. But I don't know. I might be able. I tried to find a PDF, I think, but I don't know if I don't know if I. A lot of these. That's the other thing. A lot of research you can find PDFs of, even if it's published in a journal. I typically try and find those. If I
Right.
can't find it, I have Veronica borrow it for me.
Right. Right. Yeah, I just wish I had had more time to dig into the library. There are a lot of books that I saw that I wanted to read, but they just kept me so busy in school. And the idea behind music school is that,
You're talking about in university, or?
ideally, yeah. And the thing about music school is, like, ideally, you'd be spending like 4 to 6 hours every day just practicing.
Yeah,
Every day.
I know.
So it's like that
Yeah.
is reading books.
Yeah. For
You know what I
it is,
mean?
yeah.
Like, yeah. So there just literally theoretically wasn't time. Not many people actually spend that much time, reading, like,
No.
practicing. But
No.
and also there are a lot of people who would spend like 6 hours practicing, and I get more done than them in like 2 hours, and it's just
Right.
because
It's all the time. How
the way you
spend it.
structure the practice, which is of course why I'm so insane about how I approach Smash, is because it's all
Min-maxing.
a direct import. It's all direct import from my practice in the practice room.
Right.
But anyways,
Well, to be fair, I didn't
yeah,
do
I just
a
wish
lot
I
of
had more
reading.
time to read.
You mean now?
Yeah, because I know there's just ridiculous troves of information, that are far more impactful than anything you're going to learn in class, that you can just find digging through the library.
Anything you're going to learn in class and anything that you're going to read in any article on the damn internet.
Yeah.
You ever think about another
Yeah.
mind-blowing is, like, you ever think about how the internet just became complete trash? Remember when we were like, 11 and it was like you could just go to your fan website and go to your whatever, and you could get some real information, and maybe there's some real conversations with real people happening.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a sea of bots on fucking social media, right? Like, anyway.
Right.
I find the internet so useless now. I mean, I still watch a bunch of YouTube, but
Yeah, even YouTube, like my YouTube feed is just getting so diluted, and it's turning into like just a whole bunch of like long form content that I don't have time to watch.
me
half
too.
of it,
Me too.
basically.
Me too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because like a lot of stuff that's shorter is like it lends itself more to meme content, or
Yeah. And there's some
maybe I'll
good.
watch like a shorter pedal review.
There's
or
good
something every
memes for
once in a
sure,
while.
but yeah.
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 But if you're gonna watch shorter form content, like that you might as well just be watching like TikTok at that point.
By shorter form, you mean a minute to 5 minutes, or
I mean, the short form truly would be like a minute or less.
a minute?
But
That's right.
but a minute to 5 minutes is kind of like a shorter,
Yeah.
short-ish kind
Yeah.
of form. But you have time to dig into like one, maybe two or three different things, and then like it's over basically.
Yeah.
It's like enough to just chew on for a second,
Well,
and then like
yeah,
swallow it and move on.
I would say that regardless of how much time you have, There are ways, and you're smart. You're trying to change your perspective in a way
Yeah.
that your average bear isn't. And mostly
Yeah.
because the tools that most people reach for are exactly what they want you to reach for, which is just a whole lot of nonsense. And a lot of the
Yeah.
emotional volatility and
Most people are just reaching for confirmation bias.
that's for sure as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Most people aren't actively looking to expand.
I think the meta level, I think that's why I like this book. It's a meta level. It's what is actually being said and what's the nature of the message.
Yeah.
And it's yeah. And anyway, so people people tend to hear what is being said or what they think is being said, but the form of the message, like how it was expressed, is just thrown away almost immediately. And I think that's partly
Right.
why a lot of these arguments happen, is because people extract to some extent a different message, mostly due to their own biases, and then they think they're arguing over what was actually said, but they're just arguing over what they perceived. And I think a lot of people
Yeah.
probably notice that and realize that. But I think the more that you can separate yourself from that, the better you're off you'll be emotionally and otherwise.
Yeah. And it's just big to separate yourself emotionally from those influences. And more importantly, I guess, like, if you want to get into that sort of territory, just spiritually or at least energetically from those influences, because kind of digging into what we were talking about with language earlier, like, people process information just perceptually and unconsciously far before they begin to articulate it
Yeah.
and put it into a conscious form
Yeah.
and think about it.
Yeah.
It's just feeling and perception is how most people process information, and then you see that bleed out into how they structure their language and what sticks over time, and that's kind of like a communally or culturally built construct over time too.
Yeah.
And what makes studying linguistics and language so interesting is that informs about the steady growth and formation of that process.
Which process?
The process of how we organize our perceptions and then communicate our, I guess, findings,
Yeah.
and all unconsciously,
Yeah.
specifically,
Yeah. Yeah.
because people don't consciously think, "Hey, let's string these three words together and see if it sticks." See you later.
Ye-
Someone didn't think, "Hey, let's just start saying see you later and see what happens." Maybe
Yeah.
maybe it'll be the guy who thought to say see you later, and I'll be going down in history as the guy who thought.
Yeah. The guy. The guy
It just started
who thought it
happening.
was see you later.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Maybe if I go viral with 5 million views saying "see you
See you
later,"
later.
no one did
Yeah.
that.
And everybody else starts doing it. Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah,
you see how
it's all unconscious.
we have this idea of meme now, right? Or the memes and how they catch on.
Yeah,
As this sort of cultural, just a cultural concept that gets shared. But memes, in that sense, have been present in language and also just sort of cultural, cultural concepts. I mean, ideals, virtues, morals. Another book I read recently is by a guy, and it's called the Linguistic Construction of Reality, and he basically argues that so many things that we think of as reality are actually just linguistic categories that we think we describe a situation, but actually the way the situation seems to us in the first place is based on possible labels that we can put on it. You know what I mean? So something is the example that he gives at the beginning of the
like,
book is like a dog chasing a cat. We have this word chase, which kind of means pursue in the same direction, kind of implies that you're trying to catch the thing that's in front of you. So it has all of these connotations to it. It could just be what you really saw was a cat running and a dog running. That's really what you saw. But you know what I'm saying? So, and I know it seems a bit vague, like, oh, it's not really a big deal, but that's like so much of how we describe events. And anyway, but as I say, it sort of affects our perception in the reverse direction, where what are possible labels we can put on it. Anyway, and those labels are
Right.
cultural too. You know,
Right. Right. I guess like where would you go with that?
we'll go with what?
Like what would I guess where was like the where would you kind of land the plane there?
And
Where would be a meaningful place to land the plane on that thought? You know,
you mean to wrap up this part of the conversation?
like I guess like what comes
What
to
do you do with
mind and
that?
attention?
You mean what
What
do
do
you
you
do
do
with
with that
that information?
information? Yeah.
Um, for me, I'm what I personally do with that information. Like lately, I've been
Yeah.
trying to study Polish again.
Yeah.
I think it's a first of all, in terms of practicality, I think it's a very powerful way of learning a second language, like you're studying Spanish,
Yeah.
and it it kind of helps you to adopt that childlike blank slate again, because you don't make assumptions of like how do I translate this into my language. Well, maybe they
Right.
use a word that you would never use there, or that you think you would never use there, because you think
Yeah.
it means this other thing, but actually for them it goes perfectly together. I can't think of an example off the top of my head in Polish, um, but
Well,
anyway,
there are words in particular in Russian and German specifically that capture very specific emotional states, like somewhere
yeah,
between like depression and like languish, you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
or like nostalgia, like specific types of nostalgia,
yeah. Right,
where
right, right.
we just call it all nostalgia or like you know
Or we use multiple words to
remembering.
describe the same thing, and we don't have a short.
Right? Yeah.
I think the takeaway, if you want
Like
to,
in Spanish, there's
no,
like
no,
in
no, right.
Spanish, there's I'm realizing there's like here, there, and over there, where we just say here and there, you know,
Well, we say over there,
like
but
there's like
we
acá,
do use
allá,
two words.
aquí, ahi, you know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like we just say here and there and over.
Well,
Like there's more specificity for a certain type of word in one language than there is in another, and
for
I
certain
guess
concepts, yeah. I think another
yeah,
example is like I went to Norway with Veronica over November time, and we kind of did this thing where we went on a tour with some Sami people. If you're familiar with Sami, they're basically an indigenous people. They're an indigenous Finnic people to that area of the world, Norway, Finland, blah blah blah.
okay,
But they've been kind of like Native Americans in North America and other parts of the world. They've been kind of bred out, if you will. But the
yeah,
Sami woman said that, oh, they have all these words for different types of snow, whether how wet it is or I don't know how sticky. I mean, she didn't specify, but she said, oh, we have like I don't know how many. She said
yeah,
20 or something like that, right? But they're all relevant because they raise reindeer and they're
yeah,
nomadic people, so they might throughout the seasons go to a different area to graze their herd, whatever. And
yeah,
that type of snow, it's useful for them to have a shorthand for that type of snow. Sure, it comes from something
yeah,
else, but the point is, we would use maybe multiple words. Oh, it's kind of like wet and easy to pack and blah blah blah. We might describe it in a bunch of ways, but there wouldn't be a
yeah,
consistent way that everybody uses to describe it because we don't consistently run into the situation where we have to describe it because it's
yeah.
irrelevant, right?
Yeah, it's all just macros and snippets encoding
Yeah,
for
yeah. Anyway, I guess
linguistic packets,
what I'm
basically.
saying
And
is, I think we have an
yeah,
idea that we are in this post-historical era where we have, where like we have this science, we have everything broken down to a science, but actually a lot of concepts that we use. It's almost like I almost feel it's almost like society is sort of divided in two. I mean, there is a very like the papers that I read, they're written in a very technical language that's almost a different language. Um, but then in day to day speech, just as like a human being, I mean, going to the store, walking down the street, talking with your wife, talking with your wife's family, having a meal or something like that. I mean, it might as well be the
yeah,
year 3000 BC, right? Because we're the same. We have the same equipment, right? We
wiring.
We have the same
Yeah.
wiring. We have the same social wiring, and we tend to form the same social groupings. I mean, based on similar drives,
Yeah.
but then we have all these like instruments now that allow us to measure things, and I think we think, or as a culture, we think for some reason that now we behave in this extra evolved way just because we can look at things that are really small.
Differently.
You know what I mean?
Just
It's
because we
like,
have just because we have a different tool through which to analyze things, we think that like we just view everything through the lens of
now
that
we're
tool.
on
And
that
that tool
level.
is like scientific measurement and
Yeah.
analysis, and but like science is fundamentally a tool.
Sorry. Oh yeah. What are you doing? Oh, that's fine. Oh, that's beautiful, sweetie. Oh, she's doing her paintings.
Oh, I see.
Michelangelo.
I thought she was
Oh, well,
giving you
oh,
some lighting
those are
there.
some big. You think they'll dry?
I hope so.
Okay. You're probably gonna have to leave that out for a while, but okay. Just, but are you sure it won't like crinkle up? Okay. Anyway, but yeah. Anyway, yeah. As you're saying, we think we're on a different
Got a
level.
young artist on our hands.
I actually just doing some creative Sunday stuff. Today's Sunday, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's if you want to know what would you do with that information. That's where I'm at. Like it's changing how I try and interact with people and think about like I don't engage with people anymore. I don't not that I have anyone to talk. I mean, I live in Scotland. I don't have anybody to talk to except her.
I'm an
And
Ubermensch. I'm above people.
no, that's the thing. I'm not trying to be above, but what I'm saying is like there is a level where I love to talk about this stuff. I'll talk with you on the podcast anytime. I don't know how to make a difference, and I don't know how to because a lot of the talk about the culture wars, whatever. It's like everybody trying to push the collective boulder in their direction or something like that. And I just first of all, I don't think we're the ones
Yeah,
pushing the
everyone's got an
boulder,
agenda.
right?
Yeah.
And even if we are pushing the boulder in some small way, I think that we're being guided in some direction that we don't know what it is, and we pretend that we think because everyone wants to think they have agency too. So they're always ascribing agency to their actions that probably isn't there, but they're doing it in retrospect.
Right.
You know, everyone thinks they have reasons and
Everyone,
whatever, and I just don't pretend to
well,
have
it's
reasons.
yeah, it's ego inserting itself into the situation.
To a large extent, it is ego, and of course, our egos are
Yeah.
being exploited in that way.
100%.
But that's anyway.
But I suppose, I mean, it's really unclear what there is to do about. People have different ideas about what should be done about the situation. Anyways, it's anything
but
that
what?
gets done is done by a small cohort of people that I guess are speaking to something that people are feeling as a majority in some sense, and it's a collective feeding of an idea that takes over culture, basically.
But I guess
So
my first question would be, what
you
is
don't
the
fundamentally have
situation?
control over.
What is the situation? We don't even know what the situation is. I think that's my main problem.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, no one ever completely knows what the situation is,
No, for
but
sure, for sure, for sure.
you can only and continue to approximate it as closely as you can over time. It's like a North Star that you get closer and more dialed into over time.
Right,
But
asymptotically. I do think that we have a particularly poor sense of what the situation is, though. At least maybe that's what it's felt to me more
right
and more.
now,
Yeah, and I'm not saying
Yeah.
that you do, or that I do, or I'm not really sure what I think the situation is.
yeah,
But yeah. And I still have convictions about certain things, and I wouldn't take back a lot of things that I've said in the past because I think I had good reason. I think I was behaving in good faith, but as far as like the whole meta narrative around some of those things, whether it's COVID or the transgender stuff, that's mostly what I've argued with people about because they're the things that were the craziest. I don't even know what the larger situation above that is because it actually a lot of that feels low level to me now.
Yeah, I mean, it's all just another tool or topic to convince people that this specific issue or political issue is what matters the most. But what matters the most is just people connecting with each other on a social, cultural, and energetic level. Because
That's true.
people actually have a whole lot in common, no matter how far apart they really are. And the thing that makes us feel more distant from each other are precisely these issues around COVID, around transgenderism, or now everyone is, strangely enough, asking the Jewish question publicly these days in the media. I never in a million years thought I'd see this, but here we
I'm
are.
not
So
surprised.
here's a yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a very strange. It's very surreal to see this, but
Yeah, I know.
they're all questions that lead us further away from what is the central question. And the central question is, how do we create a community, a communal society that we
Yeah.
can all
Yeah.
develop, derive more, I guess, personal meaning from our interpersonal connections, and find more common ground. And not to say cheesy stuff like unity for all or whatever, but it's like
Yeah.
people don't realize how much they have in common because we're constantly being fed all these narratives that are specifically designed to make us see the space between us instead of the space that we
Yeah,
share.
I mean, I will say, I think I would agree. And one reason why I wouldn't take back some of the things I've said is because in some cases, it is like directly affecting your life, like COVID and whatever all that was.
Yeah,
That completely
yeah,
turned our lives completely upside down. So how are you gonna just, oh,
yeah.
I'm
That
above
fucked
it, I'm
everything
above
up.
it, I'm over here, right? Like, good luck, dude.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you're getting chased around the grocery store by
Yeah,
the manager because
by
you don't have a
some
mask on.
asshole. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. For me, it was Menards
yeah.
with my grandma,
It's
but yeah, it was just
yeah.
surreal. It was like, so anyway, that maybe it's just, I'm also feeling there's like a psychedelic. I mean, everything's psychedelic after maybe things we've been through, but um,
Yeah.
even the social layer is a construct, but it's, because everyone's always talking about how, escape the matrix. Andrew Tate's out here like, oh, we're gonna get out of the matrix, whatever. But the matrix goes so much deeper than you think it does, because
Yeah.
it's even the social contract, if you want to use that term, that you've entered into without even knowing it, just because you've been encultured into your culture, you know, and you're not
Right.
getting out of that one. You already speak the language, you already, and another
You've
thought I
been
had,
programmed with this because the language programs you
yeah, and
and it
also,
structures the way you think. Which
yeah,
is why when
yeah,
you get into the psychedelic side of things and you
yeah,
realize you can like start to construct an a mental apparatus that can begin to attempt to extract itself from its linguistic subconscious
like the
substructure.
scaffolding basically. Language is just a scaffolding
Yeah.
for
Which is also kind of why learning
cognition.
languages is so cool, is because it forces you to, you know, no psychedelics required. It just
Yeah,
simply removes you, it decouples you from that, and you have to learn a new framework. And as you get enough material in this new framework, you suddenly start to realize that, there's similarities and differences between these two, and you realize that there are two completely different cultures there.
yeah,
That, and then it forces you to ask all the questions we're talking about, which
yeah,
is, what do we have in common and what's different, and then you get into cheesy questions like, how do the differences enrich our culture as like cultural soup, and
yeah,
how do they just simply inform different ways of life that are relevant to a different surround,
yeah, yeah. And I think one thing that stands out to me
like
is,
the having 20 different words for snow,
yeah,
for
yeah,
instance.
that is that as well. Um,
Yeah.
but one thing that stands out to me is how whenever, you know, the whole Chomskyan thing is that all languages are basically equal. They basically all say that, and that's the big thing about the linguistic construction of reality, where he's arguing there's basically a big assumption that's made in modern linguistics, which the guy calls the intertranslatability postulate, which is the idea that you can translate anything into any other language in principle. Which you might be able to, I mean, because basically Chomsky would say, oh, well, even if you have to use 20 words in this language, like you said about like the German, or Russian
Yeah.
emotions, right? Oh, well, you're still translating it. But are
Yeah.
you really? And I think he would argue that you're not. And I think the interesting thing when you're learning another language is you're not just learning the culture, you are sort of occupying the culture and you're stepping into an imposter role where you're kind of like, like if I go to the grocery store in Poland and I do the formulas, oh, do you, it'll be this much. Oh, do you have a card, or, a loyalty card, whatever? Oh,
Right.
no, I don't. Blah, blah, blah. Do the formula. She might have no idea that I don't really speak Polish, but I can do this particular situation, right? This
Interaction. Yeah. I
particular
go to the
formula,
grocery store.
right?
I can,
Right?
you know,
And I have this
yeah,
whole, I've just taken on
check
this
out a
whole
book in the
persona
library.
of this guy
Yeah.
who's talked to me, right? And it's like you're a totally different person too. You
Yeah.
become a different person, in that context,
Yeah.
and it's like it makes you think deeper about like we've had these psychedelic experiences where the mask starts to melt off, you know, and you
Yeah.
realize that that mask is not only a tool but it's kind of a prison as well. In your culture,
Yeah.
because you're bound by the rules and the terms and conditions of the culture that you've been inducted into, which again you had no choice in the matter.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah. So now we're 30 years down the line where we're having these culture wars as we call it. It's funny that we call it that.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to be to the extent possible. I don't want to be a combatant in these fucking
Culture wars.
yeah, just yeah.
Yeah.
I'm forced to be bound by
It's
certain
very
terms and
silly.
conditions, but I don't. I'll take the minimum. I want the minimum sentence
Yeah.
on this place, whatever. But and I love talking about it. Though.
Well, it's yeah. It's I just sometimes I think about like when a couple meets and one of them is speaking a second language, which is usually English, and then the other person is speaking a primary language. How that relationship evolves when the other partner learns this first partner's primary language as a secondary language, and then they learn what this person becomes when they have to adopt this cultural language,
Yeah,
idioma,
idioma.
and this person gets to be their true self as far as they're concerned.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
person they grew up being.
yeah.
They're like showing you like a representation, a different distillation of who they are
Yeah.
that's less articulate and
Yeah,
can probably is able to express less of their personality as a result
possibly.
because
Yeah,
they're just trying to get through this new I'm trying to use a word that's not language, but you know what I mean.
No, I know. It's like
Just a
yeah.
construct of communication.
Sociolinguistic identity or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Some academic gobbledygook.
No, and I'm
But
reminded of
yeah,
my cousins who I mentioned
like
earlier who plays drums. His wife is from Venezuela, and her English is much I won't say worse, but it's much more rudimentary than my wife's language, English. Because my wife learned it at I don't know 14 or something like that. So she's kind of
yeah,
inducted into British culture. She's British, right?
yeah,
But this
yeah,
my cousin's Venezuelan wife, she's really Venezuelan, and her expressive power in English is much more limited. I'm sure they have. I'm not saying they don't have a great relationship, but it's like what you're saying. And Wade, my cousin has good Spanish. I mean, as far as anybody in America does. Um,
yeah,
but yeah, he doesn't have a command of Spanish.
yeah. And so I just like, what's your personal experience with that? As you've been learning more Polish.
There's different sort of aspects to it. One thing that stands out to me from that book, the Linguistic Construction of Reality, is he argues that one of the reasons why people think you can translate so easily between languages is because not only is English culture dominant around the world, but it's really European culture. And
Yeah.
actually, all of Europe and now North
A
America,
Eurocentric view of the world,
yeah,
as it
it
were.
is actually like a
Yeah.
whole dominant cultural tradition, and so a lot of concepts translate very freely. Not just words, but concepts translate very freely. But I mean, there's distinctions and
Between EU languages.
oh for sure, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Even Western versus Eastern Europe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you even learn like Russian. I mean, Russian and Polish are basically. There's a concept that I think is very interesting called a calque,
Okay.
CALQUE, and it's the idea
Yeah.
that you don't just translate a concept to your language. You like literally use the same exact words. So like, um, in English we take a picture. We take a picture for some reason, right? It could be anything, but for some
Yeah.
reason we use that verb. So if you were to calc that, and I don't know if Japanese is a calc, but in Japanese you also take a picture. And it feels to me
Mm.
like it was a calc, meaning they imported photography, and so they're like, okay, in English they say take, so we're gonna take also. You don't always do that. One example I read recently is like in Hindi or something like that, you drink a cigarette, but we smoke a cigarette. In Polish, you burn a
Right.
cigarette. So that
Mm.
sort of thing. But if you were to calc it directly, then you would just say, even in Spanish, I think in Spanish they smoke as well, fumar.
Fumar.
But I don't know
Yeah.
if you fumar like cigaretto or something. I don't know. I don't know if you
Cigaretto.
can use it transitively. I guess is what I'm saying. But
Yeah. I mean, you do you would smoke fumar a cigarette
but you can. But what I'm saying is you can
or a
use.
vape.
Okay,
Yeah.
but you use it.
But I know what you mean is that like in Spanish, a lot of this translates the most readily and smoothly from English to
Translates
Spanish.
immediately.
Those
Exact same word. You don't
yeah,
even have to learn a
often
different
often the
collocation.
same. Yeah,
Right.
often yeah, exactly. But when it's like jarring when you have to learn new co-locations
Yeah.
because it happens
I'm
infrequently.
trying to think of a weird
But like
example.
that's why I wanted to learn Spanish first is because A, it has the most immediate practical
Yeah,
utility,
oh, for sure,
but
for sure, for
also
sure.
B, that
Spanish
it's
is
the
great.
easiest transition to you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you tell someone to learn Sheik or Marth before you tell them to learn a Spacey.
Of
You know what I
course. Of
mean? It's
course.
just
It just translates.
learn the fundies. You know?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of an example where
Yeah.
the calc doesn't work in Spanish. I'm sure there's easy ones, but yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is like what I was originally going to say is that like the Slavic languages, they are really close to each other. So it's like when we say
Mm.
English and German are related, it's hard for me to learn German. I'm not just going to go out and start speaking English in German. But if you're
Right.
Polish, I'm pretty sure you can just start speaking Polish in Russian. There are different formulas for sure,
Yeah.
but like I think Polish has a little bit more influence from like Turkish, but it's usually that they've just borrowed words. So it's like, okay, I just have to learn a different word. Oh, my brother called me. You have to learn a
Hmm.
different word, or whatever. But as far as like the grammar, it's like identical, completely identical. But German and English have very different grammar. So, but what were you
Hmm.
asking? You were asking about just
So
into Eastern Europe. I mean, yeah, you go as far as like Eastern Europe, and it's kind of all one European tradition. I mean, roughly, might call it Indo-European actually, if you want to get into like historical stuff. Right.
I see. But yeah, I'm sure you can get the more deep you get into to the to the woods on culture and who captured whose country here, blah blah blah. Like that'll obviously have a lot to say about how linguistics evolved over time in countries and regions and continents or territories essentially. But I guess it's just interesting to me to think about like how people who are multilingual have like multiple different personalities almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Is
So,
that what you were asking about originally,
so
or?
that's yeah, that's what I was asking about. Like, how has that evolved for like you and Ika
I've
as
I've
you've
been
been learning more Polish
Yeah. My Polish is
between
pretty
you two.
is pretty poor, but right now I'm watching
Yeah.
cartoons pretty much, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been to Poland I think 3 times now, and we're gonna go in about 2 weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I mean are you asking how I find her to be? I can't engage
Well, just
her
like
at length in
how
a
you're
conversation in Polish.
okay.
So
So it's
that's
kind of hard to tell because
yeah.
you can't just like talk for 20 minutes in Polish with each
Yeah, and
other.
I guess what I would say is what part of this book
Yeah.
and my sort of the approach I'm trying to take right now, and actually, not to like go off on a complete tangent, an interesting thing that she points out in this book is she's talking about how different kids approach language learning differently. And she divides it into analytical and I don't know how to pronounce the other word. It's the German word, Gestalt. You've seen that word probably. Gestalt.
Gestalt.
Yeah, right, whatever.
Yeah, something like
So
that.
it has a lot of different meanings in different disciplines, but in this context, she's using it to mean analytical kids are ones that immediately go for the pieces. Right? They see, oh, bird was in this utterance, and I also saw it in this utterance. So it must be the same piece. So I can now pull it out and I can use it anywhere I want. And especially if you figure out that it refers to something, oh, now every time I see a bird, I can talk about the bird. Whereas the Gestalt kids might be more likely to just see a complete utterance, figure out what's the social usage of the utterance, or what can I use that utterance to get me, and then they just start using the utterance. And they have no idea what the pieces are in the utterance. So a Gestalt kid can look like their language is more sophisticated than it actually is. Because they'll use a complete, like a whole sentence when they're like 2, but they have no idea what it means. They might say like, time for a cup of tea. Because that's the example that she gives in the book. Because like the kid had learned that when mom has tea, we get a cookie. Right? So the kid wants a cookie. They say, "Oh, time for a cup of tea," and they might even say it wrong, whatever. But they might make little mistakes, whatever. But you or I think me and you in particular, tend to be more analytical because we want to use language to talk about things. I want to talk about my day, or I want to talk about philosophy, or the finer points of whatever. And I've realized that is completely useless for language learning. It is so bad. As an adult, I should say, right? As a kid, you have
Well,
like
theoretically, if you dug into it deep enough, you would just be able to piece together any sentence you wanted whenever you wanted to.
yeah, but
Like,
it's a
like
lot
working with
harder.
the building blocks.
Yeah, but it's a lot harder than it sounds because you have to memorize all the building blocks.
Yeah, I have.
There's also the whole issue of actually being able to segment the speech stream. You ever try to listen to a complete sentence in a language you don't speak and you can't figure out which word came before which? You know, it's because it's just gibberish to your ears. So you have to get over that hurdle entirely. The only way you can do that is by learning some whole phrases in the context that they have to be used in. And then consistently start using them, or also like in movies or whatever. Seeing when are these phrases used? Oh, I've heard that phrase before, whatever. But
Just learning some common big picture applications, and then just letting your unconscious kind of intuitive learning mechanisms kind of fire off in the background and just piece it together.
well, yeah, you have to build up kind
It's
of
just
your
more efficient. It's like saying to someone, "Hey, we can analyze Smash for like 5 hours, or we can just play 5 hours of Smash."
Yeah, to some extent, yeah. I mean, there's that sort of where you just run into these people who just know they don't know why they should or shouldn't do this thing in this situation. They just do or don't.
Know that it works.
Yeah, that's mango, right? Whatever, right? And sure, there are people who meticulously break it down, but language is a little bit different. I mean, language is this
It's like
really, Smash. You can at least see what's happening. I mean, hearing a speech stream in a language you don't speak is hard. Anyway, sorry, go ahead. But.
yeah, it's just the thinking and sensing, and taking tactile parts and trying to parse them out together and be more articulate about something, acquiring conscious attention versus just feeling your way through it and intuiting your way through it and just letting the information kind of soak in and letting natural processing be. We are far more naturally efficient at doing that than being fully articulate about stuff. Like we make as humans, we just naturally are far more inclined to get more information quicker through the latter means than the former.
Yeah, I think
so. Like, why fight that?
I think part of it, this is going to get maybe more psychoanalytical, is that and this is what she argues in the book too, is that the kid is trying to, when he's learning language, is trying to it's kind of an ego thing. It's like he's trying to get things for himself, but he's forming his ego. When you're an adult, your ego is kind of already formed, and your approach to first of all, like your perceptual abilities are very different, so you can't just it's like we always talk about kids are just tripping all the time because they're like sponges and
Babies are literally
they're like
tripping all the
tripping,
time.
right? Your
Yeah.
brain is not as
The brain firing is the same.
yeah, your brain is not as plastic.
Yeah.
So what I'm getting at is you have certain abilities as an adult that can be useful and you should use those. But I think you have to emulate the child approach more. And it's not just intuitive processing, the term that you use, it's holistic processing. So learning chunks and just taking for granted that's what it means. I don't care what the structure of that is. I just know that's what it means. I don't need to know what the structure is. And even one of the messages I sent, I know I kind of sent a wall of text in the group chat about the book I was reading. One of the things I said was the people when I was taking language classes, I was always one of the best students in the class, but I always knew the most. But that doesn't mean shit. And the people who were the best users of the language in the classes I've ever been in were always the more socially oriented people. I can think of one kid off the top of my head comes right to mind from one of my Japanese classes who didn't know as much as me about Japanese grammar, whatever, but he could use it more on demand. If he wanted to say something or ask something, and he wasn't like super fluent or anything like that, but he tried and he did it and he made mistakes. But
Yeah.
anyway, I'm rambling. But holistic processing.
Yeah. I guess that a very simple example of that would be I'm pretty good at piecing together what each individual part is, and I feel pretty just consciously aware of most of my understanding in Spanish right now. I'm like about approaching like 2,000 words in at this point.
Right, but that's just a count
And
of words that
right now I'm seeing here is there's like a phrase llega puesto, like puts on,
yeah.
like a piece of clothing.
Oh
Like,
yeah, yeah.
ella llega puesto un abrigo verde.
See, I didn't even know
right?
that collocation. That's llegar puesto.
Yeah,
Is that
but it's
really?
like she arrives at putting
Is what
on
it
like what the hell does that even mean?
Exactly.
But I just like okay, I'm just gonna assume it's just gibberish and doesn't make sense. That's just what you say.
Exactly. Yes.
You're just
Yes.
conjugate. You can just conjugate llegar, which is to
You can
arrive.
go, oh, llegar, it's in the present tense, in the third person, and puesta, that's the past participle, or as we say,
and that's to put something on.
yeah, poner,
like to put.
whatever, yeah, oh, but it
Yeah.
doesn't mean shit, right? If
Yeah,
you
it's
don't
just something you say.
yeah, it's just what you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but like you could say, ella se pone un abrigo verde. She puts on herself
Yeah.
a green coat.
Yeah.
But now apparently there's like llega puesto. I'm like, why are we saying this? And we already have a way to say it that makes sense. Why do we say it this way that doesn't make any fucking sense?
Well,
at
there's
all?
more than one formula.
But it's a collocation.
There's more than one formula to say certain things, but yeah, it is a collocation.
It just seems like that's just what people say. So when in Rome,
Well, and what,
do as the
what
Romans
you find
do.
is that people,
and it just kind of starts making sense.
I think another important thing is like you almost have to treat it as like it's like a little project, and it's like the way that you like to approach Smash and music and stuff like that. You're building a little fucking playhouse for yourself, and so if there's a certain
building a house with fun foundation
Yeah.
and like a concrete foundation on not on sand,
Not on
and
sand.
you like build up the walls over time and. Yeah.
and you have to
You learn how the plumbing works.
You have to learn formulas that other people use,
Electrical grid.
but you also have to, I think one thing, mine was always analysis paralysis, and this you've experienced this too, but you almost have to go like, okay, I know that there's like a couple different ways you can say this. I want to use this one. This is my formula. I'm going to use this one, right? And that's going to be my go-to. And even in real life, like native language speaking, people have their preferences, and you can tell what someone's preference is. Veronica has all kinds of preferences. I have all kinds of preferences, and there's dialectal differences. One thing I noticed when I came to Britain is she tends to say apart from. I don't really say that. I feel like I say aside from or other than, right? But she likes apart from.
Yeah.
Okay. It's easy for me to tell because not only the context, I have a lifetime of experience with the language. Right, go down the list. I probably read that in a book, even though I don't use that formula. I've heard countless people say it, maybe in a movie, maybe here, maybe there. So I don't even think about it when I hear it. I just accept it. It might be a form I never even use. Anyway, there's a lot of other examples of that. There's like dumb, just like words that only British people use, like bin instead of garbage can. I mean, that's just easy. You can just memorize that. But there's also formulas that are not that are preferential. Anyway, but you do that. I think in language, you have, I'm trying to do that. I'm going, okay, this is gonna be my formula for that thing that I'm, and because I'm gonna need to use that again, right? And that's what the kid does.
Yeah.
Next time that this situation happens, because it's gonna happen again, I want that formula. That one's mine. Anyway.
So you just adopt these things over time,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of this is just developed unconsciously over time.
Well,
And
but you have
that's
to be more
mostly how
conscious
people
about it
learn.
as an adult.
So,
That's the problem, because your unconscious processing is
yeah.
crippled compared to when you're a kid. Kids are just unconscious, like boom,
Yeah.
boom, 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 right? So you have to do it
Yeah, it's just
consciously,
everything's firing into each other.
but you have to do it in a way
But
that is not that you don't handicap yourself.
yeah, and it's like weird have to be very conscious about that decision to be more unconscious about
Yeah.
it, but then also be consciously processing new information coming in. Whereas like because our brains as adults are specific parts are firing at specific times in relation or specific groups are firing because we've all compartmentalized that stuff and that allows us to think more critically
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
not have so much energy being spent toward just kind of soaking a bunch of
Yeah.
information in.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as a kid, as a baby,
Yeah.
like your whole brain's firing constantly. It
Yeah.
hasn't relegated specific functions to specific parts
No.
yet. So, and of course, when people are deep into psychotropic experiences, as we'll say, the EEGs will show that you enter that baby-like brain state. Which is why ideas seem to be able to be linked together so easily and readily, but why you have such a harder time focusing on one specific thing.
Yeah.
So it's like there are benefits and drawbacks to each, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's been a great conversation here, and obviously we'll keep talking and when we get off of the podcast here. But you'll be hearing a whole lot from more of the two of us goons. We've been hanging out for forever,
More?
but you'll be seeing more of it. But is there any impetus you feel to anybody checking out anything that you're doing right now on any platform or anything at all?
No.
Any
You
plug
can
you want
find
at
me
all?
right here on the J Hart Experience. That's where you can find me.
A little bit of
I do
little bit of
strongly
private,
recommend those books, though.
Yeah. What was that book called again? Or the books you
Formulaic
recommended?
Language and the Lexicon by Allison, Wray, and the Linguistic Construction of Reality by George Grace is another good one. And that's very short, very digestible. Probably have to borrow it from a library, but I couldn't find it online.
Yeah, some of those deeper texts are harder to find, on Amazon or what have you. But I'm sure it's on their good books or whatever, Goodreads or whatever. But anyways, I'll be here a whole lot more. Obviously, we'll see where things go over time. Just a place to discuss topics as they come about, and obviously, taking requests for what people are interested in discussing. But I'm J Hart Bassoon on all platforms, and I'm sure I will be plugging some type of different channel for the podcast specifically. But in time, these things will come, and hopefully, people will want to tune in, and we'll be able to provide you guys value. So, with that, peace out.